Good morning, everyone. I hope you guys had a great night's rest. Hope you guys enjoyed the first day. Now we're on day 2, and so we're going to kick off the day with our second keynote, Dr. Hervé Hoppenot. He is the CEO and President of Incyte Pharmaceuticals.
You want me to sit here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning. Dr. Hoppenot, thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your wisdom with all of our students here and helping us to continue our mission of democratizing access to the business world. We truly appreciate it.
Okay, I don't know about the wisdom, but we will see.
We'll see. So I think we can just start off by just telling the students a little bit more about yourself and your story and how you ended up at your current position at Incyte today.
Okay, yeah, I don't know if it's very interesting by itself. I, as you can hear, I am French. In fact, I came to the US 30 years ago. And so it tells you I'm not very good at foreign language, very, very slow learning there. I was mostly interested in numbers when I was in school, so in mathematics. From there, I went to a company called Rhone Poulenc. So it's a company that has been changing name a few times since then. It became Aventis, it became Sanofi. And that's where I discovered something that was absolutely fascinating me, is this concept of inventing new matter, new medicine. And Rhone Poulenc is a chemistry company, so they are doing all kinds of chemical, plastic, all bad stuff that you can think about. But they had a division of the company was about doing new molecules that don't exist in nature. So they are literally created by these people, the chemists, and trying to apply them against different type of disease and illness, etc. And I thought it was something that was frankly extraordinary because it takes 10 years. So it's not something where you just write a software and create Instagram. It's a very long process. And it's a process that has a very deep impact on the life of many people if you are successful. So that's where I went into this biopharma part of the industry, where at the time, to give you an idea, we were developing the first products that could be applied to do epidural anesthesia, because that did not exist 40 years ago. It's something that was invented by somebody, and it allowed to do surgery without general anesthesia. It allowed for mother to give birth without atrocious suffering, etc., etc. And that was the first program I worked on. After a few years doing that, the company asked me if I speak English. In fact, I remember it was a Friday in the office, and the guy is walking by saying, "Hey, do you speak English?" And I'm like, "Sure," which was my first lie on that subject. And he said, "Okay, let me know if by Monday, if you are interested in going to the US, because we have this blah blah blah." And so that was one of the things about catching opportunities when you see them. I always loved the US. I went to UCLA before. I had some experience in the US, so I just took it. Now, for me, it was easy in some way, and the way it works. I had 3 little kids at the time, and my wife was working, and this. So there was a big family discussion during the weekend. We said, okay, let's go, 2 years. We'll see what's happening, and obviously we are still there now, and proud American citizen after 30 years. So there I worked at what was Aventis at the time, and that's where the cancer dimension of my career started to build, because at the time, and it's bizarre to think about it today, at the time nobody cared about medicines for cancer. It was not something that was very popular. Most of the treatment of cancer was done with surgery and radiation, so it was sort of outside of the medical treatment, and most of the treatment we had for cancer were chemotherapies that were fairly abrasive and very difficult to take for patients. So in some bizarre way, I ended up in that part of the organization, and that's where the rest of my career, literally the next 30 years would be driven by that, because and that's part of the luck of the draw, as I was moving into that part of medicine, in fact, that's where science started to completely transform the treatment of cancer in a way that was totally unexpected. And it came with two products. One of them was called Herceptin. It's a product that was done by a company called Genentech in California, and the other one was Glivec from Novartis. And both of them were basically saying, instead of wiping out everything you can and hoping that cancer will be part of what you wipe out, in fact, it was the first step in what is now used for almost every type of cancer, which is a targeted therapy where you go after the tumor itself in a way that is extremely selective, and where, if you are fortunate, you can have an effect that will be very meaningful, like a cure. Now we speak about cure in cancer for the first time in 30 years, and it can also do it without too many side effects. So that's what I've done for the last 30 years. I was in big companies. I moved from Aventis, so the Rhone Poulenc company, to Novartis, and that was at the time of Glivec. So that was part of this technology revolution. It's like moving, from General Motors to Tesla or something. And then a few years ago, 8 years ago, I moved to a small company in Delaware called Incyte, where and it's a company that is very much about research, and it's like 800 people doing research, 900 people doing research, and and discovery of medicine between inflammation, immunology, and cancer. So that's a sort of this new way of thinking that, in fact, you can reprogram, literally, the immune system of the patient to fight their own cancer with their own immune system. And so that's what we are doing. I must say it was a professional life. It's not over, but it's starting to get late in my life. But it's a life that was very much about taking opportunities when you see them. And it was also a lot about technology and the belief that technology is making the world better. And that's something that you hear, someday, and someday you hear the opposite. It's a big debate, I think, for all of you who are at the beginning of, what do you do with your one life that you have? And that's something we can speak about, because I believe very strongly that there is something about going where, progress can be seen, and where progress is helping making the world a better place, an easier place, etc. And you can see that from the past few years. It has been very striking.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the insight. And yeah, you mentioned a lot about opportunities, and I'm curious to know, why have you decided to continuously seize opportunities, and what drives you to do so?
First, it's enjoying what I'm doing. I mean, there is no burden of the job. I mean, I'm not feeling like every morning, oh my God, another day with gravity, so it's going to be a bad day. I mean, I think you have to find some things that you enjoy doing. And I feel very strongly about it. And it doesn't need to be sort of extraordinary. You just need to enjoy it. And what you will find is that people enjoy different things. So that's a good thing. So it can fill every job that are out there, because most of the time there will be individuals who would think it's something they would like to do, and this sort of crossroad of what you enjoy and what you are good at. And knowing what you are good at is not that easy, in fact. And I must say, in my case, I started doing certain things like mathematical model for financial instruments, believe it or not. And frankly, that's something that I did not enjoy. I don't know if I was good, probably not, but I know I didn't enjoy it. So after that, I just moved to something else. And that's where, as I was describing, I became fascinated by this idea of inventing new matter and just applying it to things that could be useful. So that's, I think this question of taking opportunity is not just like, the good job kind that is like a running horse that you need to jump on very quickly. I think it can be that, by the way. There are a lot of cases where you see something and that thing will never come back. So if you don't catch it when you see it, you may ending up making a mistake. I think it's more finding yourself in an activities that will be mostly enjoyable. It's never 100%. There are all kinds of stuff that you have to do because you have to do it. That's what I call gravity. Where you say, okay, you have to do all of this administrative work. I'm very bad. I dislike it immensely, but it's part of what you have to do. Okay, and then by 9 o'clock in the morning, I'm done with it, and then you can start getting the, what you really want to do, what you like to do, and where people appreciate the way you do it.
Definitely. I think a lot of us can empathize with the idea of finding what we're passionate about doing, but also finding the balance, because to be frank, we all have to put money on the table to take care of our families, take care of ourselves. So what's your recommendation to college students in trying to figure out what makes them happy, what they're actually passionate about, and what advice would you give to them to help figure that out?
Yeah, I think you have to try. I mean, it's like, there are very subtle differences in different type of jobs or activities you can do professionally. I mean, it's like ping pong and tennis. It's the same thing. When you look at it from far away, tennis and ping pong is the same game, except that some people are really good at tennis and some are really good at ping pong, and they are not the same people. So the question is, when we say, banking is boring because there is no goal in life except to make money, I tend to agree with that. In fact, I think banking is a real issue. But at the same time, in the banking world, there are a lot of activities that are really interesting, that are really motivating, that are good for the world, that are making an impact in some way. And the question is, how do you find that? So I would say it's a very granular thing to do and find what kind of activities, something where you will be good and you will be enjoying, which I think requires to try and not to be afraid of making a U-turn. I was 4 years into my career, and people were saying you could do this, you could do that, get a promotion, a big title, blah, blah, blah. And I literally made a complete U-turn and decided to do something else because, as I said, I was not, feeling that I was enjoying it in a way that would make it reasonable to spend my entire life doing this thing. That's the one life thing. I mean, you have one shot. I mean, there is one. So you have to be fairly clear about the things that you want to not do, at least. And then you need to ask around you what are the things where you are good. Because sometimes you don't realize it. I mean, it's something that is more in the eyes of the people around you.
Definitely. I'm interested to know, your company has been extremely successful during your tenure, driving revenues up by over 500%, tripling the clinical candidates, and expanding to new avenues of research. I'm curious to know what has been like the key to that success, and also your ability to hold on to top leadership and the culture you guys have fostered.
So the company I joined is called Incyte. It's a group of researchers. That's where it started. It has been basically what we did is to invest very meaningfully, so more than what we got in terms of revenue. So we were like burning money in a meaningful way to discover new products that would have application in immunology and cancer. And in some cases it doesn't work. I mean, 9 times out of 10. But we were fortunate to have a new class of product completely different from anything that existed before, that in fact worked in multiple indications, both in immunology, like rheumatoid arthritis and alopecia areata, etc., and in a certain form of leukemia, very rare form of leukemia, where in fact it is a life-changing product. So what happened is that we started to get revenue. So that was the good news a few years ago, where suddenly we had the top line. And what we were able to do is to continue to invest in R&D during all these years. Now we are spending like 1.7 billion a year in R&D. So it's a very meaningful part of and the revenue is around 3 billion. So we are like north of 50% of what we get goes into R&D. And as I said, the goal is to continue to bring this totally different type of molecules, products that will change the practice of medicine around the world. So it's a very ambitious company. You know, we are not shy to be looking for the big thing. And we were fortunate enough, now we have like 6 products that are bringing revenue into the organization. So it's a business model that makes people very, very nervous. The bankers first. I mean, they are like, how can you spend that kind of money when you don't know what's going to happen? And the answer is, that's why we spend it, is because we don't know. So we want to know, and therefore it will take 3 years to do an experiment that will show that it is or is not something that is of value. And you need to have shareholders that are long-term, in fact, very long-term, 30 years. So nobody, the goal is not to have people who are looking at quarterly earning per share kind, because then they will get crazy. I mean, and I'll get fired in 5 minutes. I mean, that will be very quick. And to get shareholders who believe, in fact, there is a long-term view, and then trying to manage that on one hand and to be productive with the research on the other. And then to give access to our medicine. I mean, the other issue is access and how people are able to benefit from them, knowing that every country in the world has a different system.
Well, definitely. And, you know, you talk a lot about this long-term view and how things take time. And so I'm curious to know, how do you get your employees to understand that we're working for the long term as well as their shareholders? And how do you get them to both buy into that mission and understand that, like, things aren't going to happen in a year or 2 years? It might take 5 to 10 years to see the fruits of their labor.
I think externally, as I said, I mean, in some way, as in my job as a CEO, you select your own shareholders. And you do that by doing sound bites. You know, if I'm standing at some conference like the JPM, once a year we have the JP Morgan conference where every biotech is presenting. If I'm standing there and saying, I really don't care about profit, then you get a little bit of like, whoa, what was that? But then what it will do is that everybody who is looking at very short term is going to go away. Probably they will tweet that I am an idiot and blah, blah, blah. And they will go and invest somewhere else where maybe there is more visibility in the very short term. Because I think shareholders need to know, you know, what you don't know as a CEO. So that's one aspect. And then obviously you need to deliver, because you cannot be always long-term, never, and nothing ever happens. And then internally, frankly, there is no problem. Most of we have like 900 people now working in R&D. Many are PhD and MDs and came from academic centers where there is a mission, there is a pride of saying we have completely transformed the practice of medicine everywhere in the world for the treatment of myelofibrosis, polycythemia vera. I mean, so a rare disease type, but you know, when you look at the planet scale, it becomes important. And the fact that it will take 5 years. You know, out of this group of 900, I would say we have probably 400 of them working on projects that may or may not become part of our portfolio in 2031, 32. So everybody is, you know, looking at this 5-6 years horizon as the normal way of thinking. So there is, I think people understand, internally people are very, very conscious of the game, which is this sort of slow motion sprint. You know, you have to go fast, but it takes this very long time to get anything coming to fruition financially.
Absolutely. And so there are a lot of students here that might be interested in entering the biotech industry, and oftentimes they're caught between studying finance or science, and oftentimes it's very difficult to do both. And so how does financial expertise and scientific expertise work together at Incyte, and which do you see as more important to develop?
I think the most important for a company like Incyte is the science. I mean, that's now, does it mean like only scientists like PhDs in biochemistry or in biology or MDs can make it in a company like that? Absolutely not. I'm an example of that. I think it's a mindset. So there are departments at Incyte in the companies that are dealing with logistical issue. We have a manufacturing. Tech ops is a big aspect of what we do. We have, and the quality attached to it. You know, we do cancer drugs, so we cannot someday say, oops, we could not produce it, and so we have to have 100% certainty that we will always have all the products available all the time. That's sort of a very high bar. There are obviously people working in finance, and there are all kinds of different jobs on the commercial side, etc., that are very, very interesting. Think of it. I mean, you come with a new tool to a doctor working at Sloan Kettering Cancer Center here in New York, and you have to explain to them how to use it. So it's not something that is just you know, the commercial thing where it's not a used car kind of a job. I mean, it's a very technical job. So there are a lot of ways to have a very interesting and fulfilling career in biopharma. And I think at the end of the day, the science path is the path that has the most clarity in how it can be working and evolving over time.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And touching on the topic of science, where do you see the pharmaceutical research and development field going in the next 5, 10, and 20 years?
But you know, the way it has been, as I said, the way it has been evolving is by pockets. I mean, you had waves of innovation. So in the 70s, it was all about hypertension. We don't remember people were basically getting strokes at 50 very often, and you know, with all the long-term consequences. And that was a normal thing in the Western world. To go through that consequence of this went away. And today, hypertension drugs are all generic, free. I mean, cost 1 cent a pill, and it's something that has been put behind us in many ways. Then you saw the viral. I was part of the HIV saga, which was something everybody should remember, because HIV was a disease that was very infectious. I mean, it was a pandemic in some way. People were hospitalized. In fact, here in New York at the hospital, there were 5 floors for HIV patients where it was more or less palliative care. And then people started to come up with good medicines, and it took a number of years. You know, that's a sort of the impatient way to look at it, but it went fairly quickly if you look at it in terms of cycle. And what happened is that suddenly, because of combination, being able to put some of these drugs together, it became possible to stop more or less completely the growth of the virus and the infection rate. The infectivity of the patient became lower because of the low viral burden. And the 5 floors of the hospital became one little office where people are doing social counseling, and most of these products now are generic and free and available for everybody who needs them. So that was the sort of the big one of the big steps, and now we are entering a step where I believe there are 2 very complicated situations. One is immunology in general, and the autoimmune disease, and the way the immune disease is sort of misbehaving in some cases. So too much, not enough. Not enough is leading to cancer. Too much is leading to all kind of autoimmune disease like vitiligo. We have a new drug, a new product for a new medicine for vitiligo. So that's one field, cancer immunology. And I think the other one that everybody is very interested in is obviously CNS. And you know about Alzheimer, you know about all of these sort of you know, problems coming from unknown causes today. So it's a very basic work. So my view is that, you know, solving one problem at a time, the next 2 big things will be immuno-oncology and the central nervous system, and specifically Alzheimer.
Wonderful. And so, as a CEO, you know, it's your job to like set the vision and the outlook for like the company's future years. And so, how do you hope to expand Incyte over the next 10 years, especially given the different fields, the different components of research and development that we'll be developing in the next 20 years? How do you hope to expand the company?
No, the company is expanding. So geographically now we are operating in Japan, China, Europe, and North America. We have partners for the rest of the world. So we are working with more local companies in Latin America, Middle East, and Asia. And so that's one aspect, is creating the infrastructure and getting the people and doing all of that, which frankly is a lot of logistical things to do. And then in terms of research, we have 20 products now we are working on in the clinic, so in clinical trials, in a multitude of indication, and the expectation and the hope is that some of them will make it, probably 3 or 4 out of 20, and that will drive the company for the next 10 years. We live with a cycle that is around 10 years because everything we do has a patent at the beginning of the life of the product, and then the patent goes away more or less after 10 years of commercialization. So every time you have a win, you need to be already working on the next one because you know your win is going to disappear 10 years after it was commercialized.
Definitely. Pivoting over to like another question. Recent trends show increasing pharmaceutical prices as one of the biggest issues on Americans' minds. What do you see is your responsibility to society as a CEO of a major pharmaceutical company?
So first, I think the responsibility is not just the US. So we have a responsibility for the entire world. And when we think about new medicines, there are always 2 dimensions. One of them is how to be successful with that medicine to be able to continue funding for the next wave of research. So that's a sort of commercial success. And how do we make it available to everybody who needs it? And sometimes it's almost impossible. I was speaking about a topical treatment for vitiligo. I mean, we know, starting with at the beginning, that it will be very difficult because there are 25 million people around the world suffering from vitiligo, and there are some parts of the world where access will be almost impossible for something like that. Now, when you speak about a very rare disease like leukemia, some of the indications that we have, what we put in place is a free drug program immediately, and it's a compassionate use program in some way, and then we go from there. And then we go with every country to see how they could reimburse the product, because that's the role of the health minister in some way, and how we can do it in a way that will be appropriate financially for each of the countries. So you will see a lot of countries where we have sometime it's not a discount system, but it's a free product system, like buy 1, get 9 for free, sort of. And we have done that in many countries. And then in other countries, we have negotiation with the health minister, like in Europe, in France, they are a pain in the neck. And you just go to the point where when you get reimbursement, you stop your compassionate use, and then people are reimbursed. And in most of the European countries, everybody has 100% reimbursement with 0 copay. So it's very simple. You go to a pharmacy in France, you have €1, you pay €1, you get your product. So, and everybody is covered. And then there is the US. And that's where the whole thing would take like 16 hours because the system is absurd. The system is totally screwed up. The system is not just, it's socially unacceptable because it's basically a system where in this country, a lot of people who have money will have excellent healthcare, and a lot of people who don't have money will be, doing a mortgage to pay for their healthcare. And most of it is not medicine. Medicine is a very small part of the healthcare issue, and frankly, it's something that all of us Americans in the room need to be politically fighting for, is to have universal healthcare for, at least for life-threatening disease. I mean, you could argue, like, if you are sneezing, you can get Allegra or Zyrtec, and frankly, if one of the two is more expensive, you can pay for it, and if not, you can sneeze, and that's the end of it's not the end of the world. If you have cancer, my view is that it is the responsibility of all of us as a society to cover the cost of the cancer treatment for our fellow Americans. And as you know, it's not the case yet. It's something that has been very difficult to engineer. So that could be a very good place to work. In fact, becoming an engineer of a good healthcare system is, I think, something that could have an impact on millions of people. So in the US, as you know, we have Medicare and the government, we have private payers, and it's a complete mix of different systems where the biggest issue is not the price of the drug at all. I mean, that's what we hear, the whole political thing, but the reality of the issue is the co-pay, the out-of-pocket co-payment. I mean, that's what is unjust, because I know the Medicare system is saying today, when you get your first prescription, you have to pay in cash, Medicare, government, and there is nothing we can do on the pharma side. And you have to pay $3,400. So generally, all the Medicare patients we have taking our product will have to give in cash. How many people don't have $3,400 I mean, it's madness. So the new law that was just passed is reducing that to 178, so it's better, per month. So it will be 2,000 per year. So there are some progress being done in terms of access, but I can tell you it's a struggle. What we do as a company is that for all government, we cannot subsidize the co-pay. We cannot do it. It's illegal by law. So we do it for commercial patients, which is crazy, by the way, but that's the way it is. We do it for commercial patients. So every commercial patient, we will cover the copay. And then you have everybody who is uninsured, so not government, not commercial, who are basically receiving the compassionate use programs that we still have in place. But it's painful, no? I must say. It's a lobbying effort. I mean, everybody knows. I mean, there is, politicians are politicians. You have to respect them for that. So they have their way of getting elected. And unfortunately, this thing about the price of medicine became a political subject in the US. It's not in other countries, because in other countries there is no copay. There is no, so it's a very US situation that is hopefully will evolve in the right direction. And I think the right direction is solidarity between people, so that we help each other, not everybody for themselves.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think a lot of us are cognizant of American health system. And so I guess, you talk about reducing copay. Is there anything else that you think might help fix the system or solve it? Like, what are your thoughts on how the system can improve?
I will tell you, I was part of roundtables, endless roundtables discussing what would be the best healthcare system if we could. And because I speak in a bizarre English, I was always the guy who was speaking about what's happening outside of the US. Is there any place in the world where there is a good system? Because it's a good question. Why not take the best practice and then try to apply it to this country? And you find good systems. You find private systems like in Switzerland and Germany. They are universal by nature. Everybody is covered. They cost far less than the system we have here. I mean, in terms of total administrative cost and all of that. Taiwan has an excellent system, in fact, for serious disease. Now, Taiwan is very small, and it's all top-down, like everybody is an employee of the government, so it may not be scalable to the US. I'll tell you the problem when, even politically, when you take the left and the right, or the center, not the far left or far right, you take people at the center, more or less, you could get an agreement. You can get a consensus on what would be a good system for Americans. And the problem is that you don't know, nobody knows how to go from where we are to that new system that we would invent. And because the system today is so complex, most people don't understand it at all, including politicians, including the head of, CMS. I mean, because it is so complex and contradictory by nature that it's difficult to undo. But I think it takes political will, and there is always the all or nothing kind of thinking, which applies to every decision we make in a company, or I guess as a politician, is you don't have to start with the all or nothing. You can do it for small slices of the existing system and then go from there. For example, I have been lobbying for years that cancer should be like HIV at the time. When HIV came up, in fact, there was a special rule saying there is no copay and full access for HIV treatments. and a little bit like the vaccine for COVID recently, where people said free testing for everybody. I'm sure you have like 200 of them in your drawer somewhere at home. But so it's the same idea. Is saying you can take, for example, cancer, which frankly is a social issue where injustice is probably the highest, and where you create a system for that. You could do it as part of the moonshot. The Biden moonshot could include something about access to cancer treatment that I think would be very, very valuable, in fact.
Yeah. Sure. And yeah, you touched on American politics, and over the past year, drug prices have increased and inflated by 31.6%. And so...
No. Sorry, one? No, in fact, medicine price went down 2% last year.
Okay.
So, it's a very interesting thing because it's part of the slogan, the discourse about medicine. The way our business works, and it has all kind of problems. I'm not in any way doing the sort of everything is fine. The way medicine works is that we, on private money, invest all of this research, and obviously most of the medical research in this country, in the world, is coming from private funds, interestingly. And you get a patent on your discovery, and then your patent goes away after 10 years, more or less, and then your discovery becomes owned by everybody on the planet. It's a fairly weird thing, when you think about it. So the question is that the price you are quoting, which I'm sure is right, is the price of patented medicines. Yeah. So when you look at patented medicine, obviously what you see is that the new medicines are more expensive than the old one, and therefore patented medicines cost tends to go up. But when you look at the overall cost of medicines, all the products that are coming from the biopharma industry, in fact, it has been going down because of the discount and because of the generic. You have Lipitor, so big change in the life of people with high cholesterol, which was leading to cardiovascular problems, so big, important thing. Lipitor made billions and billions for years, and then one day, boom, Lipitor became free to everybody. And today, you can get a generic of Lipitor. It costs nothing, and so that's a cycle you have to keep stimulating, because that's what's driving innovation. That's how you saw what happened with COVID. It was fairly, one of our products has been approved by the FDA for COVID patients, and it was used by like 300,000 people around the world for lung inflammation from the it's an autoimmune, it's an immune reaction to the virus. So I think the system today is fairly stable. When you say increase, it's not the case. The percentage of medicine in the treatment, in the healthcare cost in the US is absolutely flat. It has been flat. It's 13%. 13% of the total cost of healthcare in the US is coming from medicine, drugs, reimbursement, biopharma, and 13%, 13.7, 13.6, it's flat, and it will be flat because as soon as the product becomes big, it will deflate and die as a sort of a cost to the system. So it's a fairly interesting equilibrium, and it's dangerous to touch it because money can go away. Investor can say, you know what, I'm done with it. I don't want to do it anymore. And 8 out of 10 new products for cancer, where that I know well, have been invented in the US. Think of it. Huh? It's really important.
It definitely is. I couldn't agree more. And you touched on COVID earlier. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about it. Especially given the rapid development and distribution of COVID vaccine, how do you think that's going to affect the way vaccines and pharmaceutical vaccines are approved in the future? And do you see this as a positive or negative?
Well, I see the story of the biopharma industry changing the course of COVID as a very positive one for the industry. The vaccine, I'm not very familiar with the vaccine. What I know about vaccines is that nobody was ever making money doing vaccines before. It was one of these fields where it was like, oh my God, because it was $2 per shot or something, very low margin. In fact, it was very high volume, low margin. And doing a flu vaccine, it takes 1 egg for each dose. You have, the way it's manufactured is insane. Huh? So what happened again is that technology, the messenger RNA, which was looked at for years as being a very difficult to master technology, ended up being the way to get this new high-tech kind of vaccines available in very large quantities very quickly. So it may be a testimony to the power of technology, because that's really where it came from. It came from Moderna and BioNTech, two very small companies, by the way, and they are the two who did master this messenger RNA. Most other people did not believe in it in some way because it's unstable, it's difficult to do, and then boom, it became the way you could get this vaccine. And now they are applying it for a lot of other diseases. So I think it will be very interesting.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. And earlier you touched on American politics, and we're reaching levels of polarization that we've not seen since the Civil War. But both sides of the aisle are prioritizing the reduction of the cost of medications. How do you see this affecting Incyte if stricter legislation is passed?
No, I think the goal of reducing the cost of medication is absurd. And I'll go back to HIV, because at the time HIV had no good medicine, the cost of HIV was 10 times higher than it was after the good medicine became available. And because they had nurses and doctors and buildings and all of that stuff had to be mobilized to take care of this patient. And then they were not doing very well. And then the medicine came. So basically what you see in the cost of treating HIV, it went from 100% non-medicine to 99% medicine. And you would say it's a good thing. It's a very good thing. So the goal is not to have less medicines available. There are a number of diseases. Take Alzheimer today. We know there are millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people who are suffering from Alzheimer. You have to help them. You have to have specialized institutions where they will be living, where people will take care of them, in the best case. So that's what it is. There is no good product for stopping the progression of Alzheimer. The cost of medicine for Alzheimer today is zero, more or less. I mean, there are all kinds of other things, but think of it as treating the disease itself, no medical cost, no cost from medicine, huge cost to society, to the point where people... So guess what? If somebody comes with a pill that you take and you never have Alzheimer, that pill will be extremely valuable to society. And what's going to happen is that the budget of treating Alzheimer will move from non-medical, non-medicine to all medicine, like it happened for HIV. It's happening in cancer. We have a product for a form of leukemia where everybody was doing bone marrow transplant. So doing a bone marrow transplant costs $300,000 in the US, $200,000 in Europe. And today, the number of bone marrow transplants for myelofibrosis, which is the disease I'm speaking about, has been reduced to zero. But everybody is taking a pill instead. So the idea of saying we need to have less cost for medicine, I tend to think, I understand why people ask the question, I mean, I really do, but at the same time, it cannot be the goal by itself. The goal by itself is to have good ways to prevent, obviously, that's the vaccine story, or to treat medical treatments that today, 87% of the cost of healthcare is non-drug related. It's doctors, hospital, that's the rest. So there is a little bit, it will never be 100 the other way, but what I'm saying is that there is no reason to be afraid of having more good medicine. If they are bad, I mean, nobody should use them, but if they are good, because you can prevent a lot of costs that is coming from the rest of the 87%. So a little bit more on the 13, a little less on the 87, and the government can make money in the process because it will be cheaper to do it that way.
Absolutely. And you know, your firm, your organization, they play a pivotal role in our world's community. You know, they're helping to save lives, helping us get back to our respective families to be a part of our communities. And as you know, the theme of our conference is community through business. And so I'm curious to know, what does community and business mean to you as an executive?
So in our, well, first, I mean, and I feel strongly about that. You have to do well what you are designed to do. So we are a company that has this obsession about discovering new medicines. And that has an impact on the community. Recently, we had a new indication. So it came from a guy in biology. So you have this guy coming to me during lunch and saying, oh my God, I mean, there is this very, very rare disease called blah, blah, blah. MLN is myeloid lymphoid neoplasm. So 200 patients per year in the US, 200. And I said, okay, fine. And he says, I think one of our products may be working for that disease. And there, we basically, without a blink, everybody in the organization said, okay, let's go and do it. So we ended up doing it. It was approved by the FDA months ago. And in terms of social responsibility, I feel very strongly about it because I think that's what we do. And even if it's economically completely absurd, in fact, it's almost a charitable way of using our resources, it matters to do that first. Then you have your employees, people who are working in the company, where I feel in my job that I have an absolute responsibility for providing them with healthcare. So we have the best healthcare insurance you can think of, the S&P 500, number one, and in providing them a working environment where they know they will be treated with respect, where they know they will have clarity about their life, professional life, like what they need to do to get promoted. Everybody wants to have a career and move, so you just have to give people clarity, where they know they will have flexibility. We don't do remote work at Incyte, but we do full flexibility, where if you have a personal issue, you can speak to somebody, and then you can adjust, etc., etc. So I think there is a key responsibility to our own employees, and then you have we are in Wilmington, Delaware. You have the Wilmington community, where you have to integrate the company in a system that is a local system that requires, in many cases, being able to contribute to helping the community developed around us. I don't think we can carry all the misery of the world, and it's sad. I would love to be Elon Musk and say, hey, I can do whatever I want. In our case, we are basically scaling things by saying, number one is our customer, people suffering from cancer. Number two is the people in the organization, and number three, and you could put them all at the same level, is saying we have responsibility for people around us in the community, and where we can, when we can, we will always try to do it. So
that's a powerful insight, and just by the way you've articulated it, I can see why your organization has been so successful during your tenure. Now I'd like to open up the floor for Q&A. If any of you all would like to ask Mr. Hoppenot some questions, feel free to come up to the mic, and yeah.
Tough question. We can speak about the price of medicines. It's a good one.
Hi, my name is Cecil Elikavasimenu. I'm a business economics major at Wofford College in South Carolina. My question is, as data privacy issues continue to tighten in the EU and in the US, and there have been attempts to classify genetic data as personal property, how is this going to affect the biomedical research process, and even going to affect the future prices of pharmaceutical products?
No, it's a fantastic question. It's an extraordinarily deep question because it's about DNA, and it's about free will of people giving their information at a given point in time. And so there are regulations. I mean, you are very familiar with the European and US. They are different, so we have to adjust, and it's okay. I mean, that's not a problem. The deepest problem is the following: is that you don't know what's coming next. So when people are giving a release, authorizing us, a private company, to use their information, and potentially the mutation, cancer, a lot of it is genetic mutation, and they don't know what the science will be 10 years from now, and we don't know either. But then what they are giving us is something that may be very different than what they were thinking at the time they did it. So at the same time, we cannot have a system where we cannot go back and reanalyze information that is available and ask people to give a consent again. And it's a very sad story because in many cases, patients who have been part of the clinical trials are not alive anymore. At the 10 years after, we are doing the first, DNA analysis. So that issue is almost a philosophical thing about, can you give some things without knowing what it will be used for? And we are struggling with it every day. So we have ethical committees. There are a number of ethical committees working on that question of saying, how do we help science, because it's very useful, obviously, without going into a situation where, years later, people will be, contributing to something that they would never have accepted if they had known that it was going to happen.
Thank you.
So I don't know how to answer your question, in fact, but I think it's a very, very interesting subject.
Thank you.
Okay, hi, my name is Maria. I'm from the University of South Carolina. You said something really great about how we have a commitment to help the rest of the world fight these diseases, but in a lot of cases, especially those diseases that affect a smaller segment of the population, you say it's really much harder to kind of help those. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the process of how you choose what to focus on, whether this one, vaccine, this one you need to do medicine for all of those things, diseases that affect the smaller segments of the population.
So yeah, what I said is the opposite, that it's easier for small groups and rare disease, because then we can basically organize things through an early access program. I was part of there is a drug called Glivec. I was part of it. It was 15 years ago, 20 years ago. It was literally a cure for leukemia. There is a type of leukemia called CML, chronic myeloid leukemia, where the previous treatment was not working, and that pill, it was a pill, you take it once a day, and you did not have that disease. It was for 95% of people. It was amazing. It was called the magic bullet. So as soon as we started to realize that this was happening, we had literally, as I described it, the question of saying, how do we make this thing available for everybody in the world? So think of it. You are sitting on the moon and saying, okay, how do we make this thing work for everybody? And we ended up putting in place a system that involved a number of local communities where we distributed it under an early access program or a compassionate use program to everybody. And it was feasible because it's a small number of patients. The number of new cases in the US for CML every year is 3,000 new cases. So we can manage that. Now, if I spoke about vitiligo because I have now a product for vitiligo. It's a discoloration. It's a Michael Jackson story. I mean, it's a discoloration of the skin where the immune system is attacking the skin. And there, it's a huge issue because there are, in the US, probably 2-3 million people with vitiligo. And in the world, it's probably, something like 60 million. US, we are 5% of the world population. So it's a big problem because 60 million creating the same program is absolutely impossible. So there, we try to find other ways with commercial, cheap product, trying to find a way to make it available at a lower price. But sometimes it's almost impossible. On the vaccine for COVID stories that everybody has followed, I thought it was fairly stunning to see how quickly, in fact, the ramp up in manufacturing made it possible to give it to many, many people. And there is always, and there will always be different steps. I mean, you don't start with everybody. You start usually with the countries that are in Europe and US and Japan. And so that's the way, unfortunately, that's the way it is. But I think many companies, and you saw that with the vaccine and the COVID situation, many companies are very conscious of their responsibilities to a broader population. It's not just cynical about if you can pay, you pay. If you cannot, you don't have access. It's not the case. But it's still the case because of access to healthcare and different aspects of it.
As someone from the a smaller, I'm an international student from sort of a smaller country, so it's any kind of disease for us, it affects our entire, but then in the whole grand scheme of things, it doesn't affect the whole world. So I was curious about.
No, it's a big challenge, and frankly, government have a role to play. I mean, there is also a little bit of putting your government on the, of saying, hey, why are you not no reimbursement, or why is there no system that would allow to have access earlier to important products?
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thanks first of all for the conversation. I think it's really interesting. The NHS is always a frequent topic of discussion in the UK, so it's always interesting to learn more about healthcare and the role in society. So my name's Sam. I'm a final year philosophy, politics and economics student at the University of York. And my question is around the popularity of, I guess you'd call it like life sciences, biotech in general around the world. It's increased massively since COVID. I think it's a really positive trend, particularly as our populations age, and you can help unlock more value and help people have more of a longer health span rather than just lifespan. But a worry I'm seeing is that this trend is kind of just going to be forgotten about once there isn't the massive societal pressure of a pandemic. And I wanted to ask you whether you see the trend in increased governmental R&D spending or increased private investment in life sciences and healthcare more generally, if you see that staying, and if so, for how long, or whether it's just more of a fad of COVID.
Yeah, I think the government R&D spending is an interesting case because the government has never invented any medicine. I mean, think of it. It's amazing, and they have tried. So I think everybody has a role. The government is spending money, very good investment in basic research, where for us, or most of the biopharma company, if you move the horizon to 30 years now instead of 10, it becomes absurd. I mean, so there is a role for government R&D spending, and that role is in doing things that others are not doing because it's very unlikely to have any kind of impact that would be visible. So that's the role of government. So the NIH, the European governments, INSERM in France, or CNRS, etc., are all doing that kind of thing. You could argue that the productivity is somewhat questionable, but it's useful, it's a good thing. Now, where the government has another role is as a social glue of saying, where are we together to treat a certain type of disease? And the way to think about it is like the small village where you could say, okay, there is a risk of fire, and therefore each of us should have a fire truck and buy it privately. That would be absurd. Huh? That would be stupid. That's what we are seeing here. So what you do is that you socialize the fire truck, and you basically say, we'll buy one, and if somebody needs it, then the fire truck will go where it's needed. I feel exactly the same way about cancer and other life-threatening disease, of saying the role of the government is not just to subsidize research. It's a good thing, but it's not the key. The key is to create a social contract where we say, okay, one of us will have cancer, and we want that person to be well treated, and we are all going to contribute a little bit for it. And that's where things are, going in the wrong, not always in the wrong direction, but not going very well. In the US, I was describing it. I mean, there is this out-of-pocket issue that is totally crazy. And in the UK, because the government is not willing to spend a lot of money, they are denying access to many products. And frankly, sometimes it's very absurd because the UK government is managing the drug budget. And you heard me. The drug budget is not the point. The point is that using more of certain medicine could save a lot of money on the other side. And then people, good people, by the way, they are all interesting people to speak with, but then they will say, oh yeah, but that's not my problem. My problem is the drug budget. That's what I'm managing. I need to cut it, so that's what we are going to do. And that's sort of where I think government can be a little bit more visionary by looking at the whole picture and by cementing this solidarity between people and sometimes between generations, because old people like me are more sick than young people like you. So, in some way, I want you all to contribute to my medical cost. I mean, That's a way to look at it.
Great, thank you.
I guess that's about all the questions. Mr. Hoppenot, we're so appreciative of your time and energy
No,
and
thank you.
sharing your insight with all of us. I think we learned a lot today, and we're so thankful for you. I appreciate it.
Thank you
Go
very
ahead.
much.